Hello, my friends. Let me again say welcome to the SosoBone Media Network. And we are going to produce today, for the benefit of our past, present, and future, a glimpse into the lifestyle of none other than one of our, I would say, leading authors, representative in our Caribbean community. And don't be surprised at the influence that she has made over the last, I would say 30 years. She's not that young, but I said 30.
I would go up. I would say over 60 years.
So let me say welcome to Fern Khan. And Karen, let me say welcome to the SosoBone Media Network. And, there are some people who tell you that you need to be afraid when Trevor do an interview with you because you don't know where Trevor is going to start. And, which is how I like it to be produced, as a impromptu explanation, of where we're coming from, where we are now, and where do you see us going individually, collectively. So I'm going to ask this question like I asked Dr. Claire Nelson. Where in Jamaica were you born and what primary school did you go to?
Well, it's a good thing that I really have held on to my memories in Jamaica because I'm now in my 80s.
Okay.
I find that the more I remember or think about Jamaica, it's way back.
Oh,
I have
yes.
those memories from way back.
Yes.
Whereas if you ask me something about yesterday, it's harder to remember that. So,
Okay.
but in answer to your question, I was born in Cornwall Mountain in Westmoreland.
Okay.
And Cornwall Mountain, I think the name has recently been changed to Mayor Hall, M-A-I-R, because there is he's not Jamaican, but he has Jamaican parentage. And he has done a genealogy on Westmoreland and on Cornwall Mountain, where I'm from, on the mayor history. And because of that, he has found that we're what we call Cornwall Mountain now was really Mayor Hall. Because, as you know, Westmoreland had the largest numbers of sugar plantations.
Yes, yes.
And so Mayor Hall, I guess, was a big sugar plantation. Anyway, so Cornwall Mountain is now Mayor Hall. That's where I'm from. And I lived there with my grandparents, my mother, and we had a large extended family. My aunts and so I have fond memories of growing up in the country. We call it the country.
Well, that was Jamaica was all country. Well, let's put it that way.
It was really rural country. And my grandfather had a lot of land all around, and we knew everyone in the community. It's a community that no longer exists. And so that the memory of that community is very vivid with me because even as a child, I was there until I was 6 years old. And I knew everyone in the vicinity and trusted everyone because we all knew each other and probably we were all related in some way.
Yeah.
So I had a wonderful experience growing up in Cornwall Mountain.
Okay.
And my mother took me to Kingston when I was about 6 years old. And so from 6 until I left Jamaica at 17 to come to college, I came on a foreign student's visa to Roosevelt University in Chicago.
Okay.
But the rest of my time was in Kingston. So I went to Halfway Tree Elementary School.
Okay.
And then I went to Excelsior for high school.
Okay.
And I'm extremely proud of Mr. Powell.
Oh, well. I have had such feedback from people when they hear their primary school being mentioned in these conversations, or their high school being mentioned, because they connect, the connections are there, like, oh, she's an Excelsior girl. Okay.
Oh, yes. And I'm very proud of that fact because when Excelsior started, I went there when it was about 20 years old. So it
Uh-huh.
had been established already. But
Mhm.
Mr. Powell would tell us the story of how he established the school on
Uh-huh.
his veranda with
Okay.
5 students on his veranda.
Mhm.
His father was a teacher. He was a teacher. His, I think it was his aunt was a teacher. And
Uh-huh.
so they got no salary, you know. This was
Oh.
a volunteer.
Uh-huh.
Then eventually the school grew, and the first set of students that he sent up for senior Cambridge,
Uh-huh.
all of them passed.
Wow.
All of them,
Char-
100%. And then
that
the
was the
next
first,
year,
that was the first charter school in Jamaica. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
you know, you're right. That you're right. Yeah. No, that was exciting. And you know, what else was exciting is that all the other schools had been started. I shouldn't say all, but the well-noted school, the St. Andrews, St. Hugh's,
Mhm.
Calabar, they were all started many, many years ago
Yeah,
by,
Woolmer's was like an old lady then.
right. They all had been started, many of them by English people for their
Yeah.
children. And Mr. Powell, although in the history, we know there were other Jamaicans who started smaller schools,
Hmm.
Mr. Powell, his school grew faster.
Okay.
So there was Merle Grove, Miss Speed,
Hmm.
who
Hmm.
started Merle Grove, and she was a local Jamaican.
Okay.
And she really, a lot of young girls got their education at Merle Grove. But
Hmm.
Mr. Powell's school, when I left Excelsior in 1955, we
Hmm.
had 500 students on campus.
Wow. Wow.
That was the largest private school
Hmm.
in Kingston.
Hmm.
So, you know, though in my time, I know all the people who went in my time are very proud of Excelsior and of
Uh-huh.
Mr. Powell.
Okay. That is 1955.
Yep, 1955.
So what was I mean, in those days, were we doing Cambridge and Oxford at that time, or were we still doing third year coming out of prime high schools?
Right. People in elementary school, you still had first, second, and third year.
Okay.
Those exams were for people who really wanted to, if you passed third year, you could get into the civil service.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but high school, with a high school graduation,
Mhm.
the certificate, then you could move up the ladder a little bit, right? Not that fast, but you could move up the ladder.
Yeah, and the fact is that in those days you had to get a scholarship. You had to pass scholarship to get to high school.
Thank you. Yes. Not only that, but if you reach 13 and you were not in high school,
Mhm.
especially in one of the traditional high schools,
Mhm.
that was it for you. You could
Oh,
not go to high school again.
right.
In one of those, like St. Andrews, St. Hugh's, Wolmer's, those schools you had to enter by 12 or a little over 12, but before 13.
Yeah, because at that time you had the overage scholarship as a second leg to get there. If you never got your scholarship the first year, then you had the overage scholarship, I think that ended at 12. Am I right? Some
I'm not sure about that.
mm,
I will check it out, but I'm not
oh,
sure because what I remember is Mr. Powell was the first reputable school
mm,
that added another class
okay.
after age 13
Uh-huh.
so that students who are 14 could come into high school, a
Okay.
reputable high school. So he was the first school that really started another class
Okay.
for older students. And it was interesting because they were older than us. Like I went in before 13.
Mm-hmm.
Those who came in at 14, they were more mature than us because they had a year ahead, right?
Okay. Okay.
And in my school, all those students who were in that, we call it 5A4, they did wonderful things. I mean, Carl Rodney was in that class.
Okay.
Rose Brown was in that class.
Mm-hmm.
The Paul Harris, who was Supreme Court judge,
Uh-huh.
Paul Harris, he passed away some
Mm-hmm.
years ago, but he was a brilliant judge in Jamaica, very
Okay.
well respected. He was in that class. And so, Excelsior produced quite a number of very, very, very famous people and people who had done very well.
Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that because again, we have a history that we were taught when we were going to high school, and most of it was not really Jamaican history.
Right. Yeah,
We
that's
taught
true.
British history.
Mhm.
So there's a shortage of reference, I would say, when it comes not only to our people, but to their achievements. The fact that they were, based on what education they received during that period, they turned out to be brilliant. Okay. And I say this because up to 1969, we were still doing we're still teaching some of our elders up in the country to read.
Mm.
The program that they put in that point at that time,
Mm.
where so many of our people up in the deep in the country were still not able to read.
Yeah, yeah, that
So
is true.
I am happy to draw the comparison that those of us who were given the opportunity, because as you said, if you never got in by 12 or 13, that was it.
That was it. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so how do you compare that now to where we are in the educational cycle?
Well, truthfully, I really don't know much about what's happening now in Jamaica
In
in
general.
education.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even dare to try to compare them. I know they're really trying to do much better and to increase the knowledge. The one thing I do know about is that the history is different.
Okay.
There is much more emphasis on Jamaican history or West Indian history.
Yes.
There is much more of that. Whereas when I went to school, we had what was called set books.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, all those books came from England.
Yes.
And they sent us those books, and we had to use them to prepare for the senior Cambridge exam.
Yeah.
So most of the people in my class, we could recite Byron, Shelley, and Keats. We knew Chaucer, you
Mm-hmm.
know, excuse me a minute. I should stop my phone. Anyway,
That's
yes, so
okay.
we knew everything about English literature. We
Uh-huh.
didn't know a lot about Jamaican, except that in the culture, we really understood and we loved the local information, like
Mm-hmm.
Louis Bennett. All,
Aha.
we all knew about Louis Bennett, right?
Yes.
We
Yes.
all knew about the Jamaican stories and Nancy stories.
Mm-hmm.
We looked forward to Ward Theatre
Mm-hmm.
every Christmas, at that time when you would have Ward Theatre
Mm-hmm.
Carnival, or it was called some name. And you had Ronnie Williams,
Mm-hmm.
mm, Ronnie Williams, and
Dulcimina.
all those people, those famous people.
Yes, yes. And
Yes.
we could not afford to miss the radio program when it was coming over because
Right,
there was
right.
no repeat.
Right, right. Oh my gosh. As you say that, remember rediffusion?
Yes,
You were
yes,
around for rediffusion?
yes, yes.
Well, I grew up on rediffusion.
Mhm. I still talk when I'm talking to some of the guys in the cricket industry um, classification, I would say. When we had to be listening to West Indies cricket being played in England,
Yeah.
and they were so far ahead of us that we would be getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning to listen to the radio because
Oh,
they would already be playing the games in England, which was 5 hours ahead of us.
of
And so
course.
at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, we'd have our ears beside the radio trying
Oh,
to listen to the cricket scores.
of course. That makes sense. Of course. Oh my gosh,
Oh,
that's
I mean, that type of that type of history that we have is not being taught to our children in school.
yeah, yeah.
I would wait to say that not many of them, for example, high schoolers in across the board might be able to tell you about Excelsior and the beginning and the evolution to where it is now. Okay. Because I do not know if they look at that as important history.
Oh,
Okay.
that's a shame.
Yeah.
That is a shame. And it's funny, but when I was much younger, I really didn't think much about this. But as I get older, history becomes more meaningful to me.
Yes. Yes.
I remember even feeling Mr. Powell used to have all his students every Monday morning lined up. We had to stand up for assembly. We had a huge room where we all stood up, and there was it was kind of a religious, you sang a hymn and there was prayers. But he always told us the history of how he started Excelsior.
Yes.
And so I have never forgotten that.
Yes.
It was such an impressive history, even though at that time I wasn't thinking it was impressive. But today, when I read all that he had done, and he started the first community college in Jamaica. So he has been a really significant educator in Jamaica. And I don't know if he gets a kind of credit. Perhaps he has. I don't know because I haven't kept up with it. But what I know of his work, it's really impressive. He came to the United States after he had his third year, he decided he needed to get a degree. So he applied to Columbia University. He got his bachelor's degree in geography. Then he stayed for his master's degree in international education. And that he got at Teachers College. He wrote in his book, I read his autobiography, he wrote in his book that he never saw the light of day because in 3 years, he completed 2 degrees. Now, that's very impressive. And I've
Dedication.
even thought of contacting Teachers College to see if they have something on him because he should be honored in some way.
Right. And again, I'm glad you said that because that's part of the conversations we have been having in some of our discussions that as a diaspora, where we say we have twice the population that we have in our native country, we have not developed, these vehicles, okay, that charts, recognizes, and award, people who have contributed so much to the overall history of our development, even though they might not be on the in the headlines. Okay.
Yeah.
I say that because we talk about some of our people recognize who have soup kitchens that they have been doing for years, feeding hungry people. And outside of their community, no one knows.
Yeah.
Okay. And therefore, we are not able to motivate others to continue or to duplicate what they're doing in other places where the need exists or where the same situation exists, because they think that no one is doing anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true.
So those are some of the things that we hope that these type of conversations that we have, it will filter out into our community. But all being said, I like to talk about community versus profession, because while I recognize how important single achievement is, our community achievement and our input in our community sometimes gets overlooked, and sometimes people look at it as less significant than personal achievement. Okay, so from a community point of view, and I talk about impact, volunteerism, community work, board representation. How have you been connecting to our community in these particular ways.
Sure.
And the unselfish ways, I like to call it.
Well, sometimes it's also selfish because you really do things to satisfy your own desires too.
Yeah.
But no, I have lived here now for over 60 years, really close to 70 years.
Mhm.
And I'm very active in the community. I sit on 6 nonprofit boards right now.
Okay.
One of them is the American Caribbean Maritime Foundation, of
Yes.
which you're quite aware.
Yes.
And that board is really doing a lot to educate, not just to educate, but to provide access
Mhm.
and information and opportunities for, it began with Jamaican students, but now it's throughout the Caribbean,
Yes.
to go to school to get their degrees and
Mhm.
training in a skill or an area. It could be whatever it is, logistics, or even if you wanted to work and with immigration, say,
Mhm.
it still comes under that
Mhm.
venue. But the kids are they're graduating with the scholarship help that the foundation provides for them.
Okay.
And they are getting jobs on ships now.
Mhm.
Wherever they want to work, there are opportunities for them.
And this foundation was started by.
Geneve,
Oh,
Metzger,
oh,
Brown Metzger.
you mean former Consul General Geneva?
You're right. You knew her when she was Consul General. Yeah, and you still call her CG.
Yes, I still do.
Yeah. Well,
Once a CG, always a CG for me.
she's a trailblazer. And when you were talking earlier about the people who have not been recognized, they were trailblazers,
Yes.
and they do deserve recognition. And she's one of them,
Yes.
because she has done a phenomenal job in
Yes, she
creating
has.
this organization, which began with nothing really. And now it's a huge enterprise
Mm-hmm.
where Geneva now has all these top people in the industry
Uh-huh.
on her board.
Okay. Good.
So they're doing very well.
Good.
I sit on 5 other nonprofit boards.
Mm-hmm.
One is a settlement house
Uh-huh.
where we provide services, access, and opportunities. That's my whole um, goal, really, to open up opportunities for people who don't have those opportunities, who don't have access to opportunities. When I know I'm retired, I didn't mention that initially, but
You
retired
know,
from Bank Street.
when a Jamaican tell you they have 5 jobs or 5 boards, they never retire. Okay.
Yeah, we can't do without working, right? That's funny. But so Goddard Riverside Community Center is a settlement house, and settlement houses historically dealt with people they just didn't have the means to survive in society.
Mm-hmm.
And so we provide services from um, pre-K, pre-kindergarten,
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to seniors. And now there's a huge focus on homeless families, homeless individuals.
Uh-huh.
So, and of course, youth who come in the middle. So we have young children, youth, adults, seniors, and then homeless people.
And who are the leadership involved in these enterprises as we go along? I really would like them to be properly identified for the sake of our history.
Oh, our CEO is Dr. Roderick
Okay.
Jones.
Okay.
He's African American, a wonderful individual who really cares deeply and
Mhm.
who really understands the needs, because he worked prior to coming to Goddard. He
Mhm.
worked with another settlement house, smaller one. But now he is doing an enormously wonderful job in New York,
Okay.
getting all the resources that are needed to
Mhm.
provide those services.
Okay.
And then I sit on another one, which the goal is only to prepare children from 5th grade onwards for college.
Uh-huh.
So that's a college prep program.
Mhm.
I also sit on Bank Street College's board, that was where I worked at Bank Street as a dean of continuing education for 22 years. When I retired, the new president invited me to come back and sit on the board. So
Okay.
I'm again, this is my second my second trip
Who,
on
who is
the
the,
board.
who is the new president now?
His name is Shale Polikow Saransky.
Okay.
Yeah, he's the president. And he formerly worked with the New York City Board of Ed
Okay.
as a deputy chancellor.
Okay.
He's very effective.
Good. Good.
And then I sit on another board that provides access for kids who have a range of disabilities, from physical disabilities to emotional disabilities, whatever it is. But it's called New Alternatives for Children.
Uh-huh.
And it's a great organization. Again, started by bringing babies who were born and the parents left them in the hospital
Mm-hmm.
because they couldn't deal with them at home. And so they were called border babies in the 70s. And
Uh-huh.
then this organization began by not only getting them out of the hospital, but getting them adopted or placed in foster care
Okay.
and working then with the families to make sure they understood how to work with the children as they grew older. So
Uh-huh.
now it's a big organization offering all kinds of services. And
Where is it located? Is this
it's
kind
now on 54th Street and 7th Avenue in
Okay.
Manhattan.
Okay.
But, it's a program that also there are some Jamaicans who are foster mothers, foster parents. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So there's a big need for foster parents.
Yes.
And many of them later adopt the children, which
Mm-hmm.
is fascinating, So,
Okay.
so yeah, and so, what did I leave out? PACE, the Partnership for After School Education.
Okay.
That program trains all the people who work with other nonprofits. We have over 1,600 nonprofits in our network.
Uh-huh.
And those nonprofits train communities, the people in communities,
Mm-hmm.
how to help children achieve and how to help them move forward with the goal of either going to college or going to work. So
Interesting.
that's what I do now that I'm retired.
Okay, so now that we talk about the leisure part of your life,
Right.
um, what was your first job in the United States?
Oh, with a Chinese restaurant. No, this is really cute. I had no thought. I had no desire to come to America. I was a clerk I was a civil servant
Uh-huh.
at Collector General's office
Uh-huh.
in Jamaica.
Okay.
So when I graduated from high school, I was 15 or going on 16, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And I got a job with the Collector General's office. And
Okay.
I worked there for 1 year. One of my high school classmates wrote me a letter. I hadn't heard from her in ages
Mhm.
and invited me to come as a foreign student to America, and
Mhm.
that she had a job waiting for me in a Chinese restaurant in Chicago.
Okay.
At first, I said, "Hmm." but but after talking with my family, I said, okay, I'll go.
Okay.
So, I began to save whatever little money I had.
Uh-huh.
And I applied to the college, got accepted, and I came in on a Saturday or Sunday. I
On
started
a
working
uh,
Monday.
on a reverse note, I would hate to say what you're being paid at that time.
Oh, I was getting 50 cents an hour. But I'll tell you, at that time, no, this was in 57. 50 cents an hour, when I calculated it to Jamaican money, it
Uh-huh.
looked like I was making so much more than I made in Jamaica.
Okay.
It was like double what I was making in Jamaica. It was funny. And tips range from 10 cents
Mm-hmm.
to 50 cents
Okay.
because, salaries were much lower. This
Mm-hmm.
was in 1957.
Mm-hmm.
So people didn't make a lot of money and everything was relative. So it did seem like a lot of money. The tips were very small, but I was able to save to pay my tuition.
Okay. I'm going to ask this, but since this is something that all these immigrants who walk into this country experience, I'm going to ask you this question.
Sure.
What was your first experience with snow in Chicago?
Oh my gosh. I arrived in September, and I had one of the things, it was really my fault. I didn't do my research. I brought summer clothes, Jamaican clothes. I had a lot of summer dresses, summer sleeve dresses, no sweater, no coat, no socks. And the first morning I went, it wasn't too bad. But then the second week, it began to get cold. By then, every night for a week, I cried. I wanted to go back to Jamaica. I really wanted to go back to Jamaica. And snow, I did get a coat. There was a large Jamaican group doing well in Chicago.
Okay.
And I had lived with a Jamaican family. My friend who invited me, I was living with her. And she was able to get me a coat, some sweaters, and some other warm clothing. And so I was able to survive.
Okay.
But let me tell you, it was cold. Chicago was cold. Now, there were a group of Jamaican athletes at the University of Illinois in Champaign, Illinois. Burnley Hazley was there. Oh gosh, there were two runners, but they were very famous athletes in Jamaica. They had gone to the Olympics when
What was Carr one of them? LaBeach, Carey, Clayton.
Carr, John, yes, Carr was one of them.
Carr?
Yes, he was there too.
Okay.
And oh my gosh, they were all over, all the 10, what they call them, the Big Ten colleges had recruited Jamaican athletes to come.
Okay.
Scholarship, they had full scholarships. They did very well, but a lot of them couldn't survive the winter, and some of them went back home.
Okay.
And some of them, the racial, they weren't used to being discriminated against, and they were shocked because this was something new to all of us, really.
Yes. Yes.
And I remember in getting back to snow, I think it was George Carr who said when he got up in the morning, he was supposed to go to class, and he looked through the window and he saw all the snow. He went right back to his bed. Didn't go to class. So, so again, I think a lot depended on where you were, how you were treated, how you had enough resilience to cope.
Yes.
So those who could do that succeeded. Those who couldn't returned to Jamaica.
So coming out of this or coming into this situation, who were your most, I would say, remarkable mentors that motivated you to go into some of the fields that you end up going to afterwards? What motivated you to go into some places that you have never gone before?
Well, the one thing I knew, I wanted to work with people. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to work with people. That was my mantra. And when I went to NY, I did leave Chicago. I left Chicago. I didn't like Chicago, really. Don't tell anyone that. So I came to visit my aunt who was living in New York. The moment I came to New York, I was a different person. I loved New York.
Okay.
And so I looked in the yellow. Oh, but remember, I was on a student visa. So that meant that even if I'm in New York, I have to be in college.
Yes.
Otherwise, I'll be sent back home.
Yes.
So at that time, we had the yellow pages. And I looked through the yellow pages for a university, and I found NYU.
Okay.
I knew nothing about NYU,
Mhm.
but I applied and I got in.
Uh-huh.
And I loved NYU. And I
Mhm.
think my professors there really motivated me
Okay.
because they were, first of all, they were very different from Jamaican professors where
Mhm.
you have this distance, right?
Right.
So, and the very formal kind of relationship.
Well, Jamaica have a class system. Okay, so let's
Yeah,
move on.
yes, yes. And but I was really fortunate to meet some wonderful professors.
Uh-huh.
And I remember I majored in sociology and I had a placement at Inwood House, a home for unmarried women, young women. And when I saw how much they needed help, but they were getting it from the social workers, it was a social work entity. And I decided that I wanted to be a social worker. So that when I graduated um, from NYU, I had a bachelor's degree in sociology. And
Mhm.
then I thought, I have to go back to Jamaica, but what will I do with a bachelor's in sociology? So I
Okay.
asked around and I said, what's the nearest field to sociology?
Mhm.
And I was told social work. And at that time, this was in 62. At that time, an MSW was a final degree.
Uh-huh.
So I applied immediately in the School of Social Work at NYU, and I
Mhm.
was admitted.
Okay.
And what happened too, I remembered my music teacher at Excelsior.
Mhm.
When I was about to graduate, she pulled me aside and she said, Fern, get a profession. And I said to her at the time, Mrs. Lloyd, why would I need a profession? I'm going to have a job in the civil service. She
Mhm.
said, when you have a profession, no one can take it away from you.
Okay.
And so when I graduated with a bachelor's, I thought, that's not a profession, sociology. What is the nearest profession to sociology? And I was told social work. And that's why I went into social work.
So that was not something that we were very familiar with in Jamaica.
Really?
Well, we knew we had up in the country, for example, we had health inspectors, or but I never ran into one. I would say in all the time I was in Jamaica.
Mm. Actually, I never knew anyone in Jamaica, in Kingston especially.
Right. So if they're not in Kingston, they're surely not in the country.
But in the country, remember, you had 4-H clubs,
Yes. Yes.
and there you had the closest
Oh, oh,
to community workers. You had community workers. But
yes.
that I knew about, but it wasn't as a profession. But I love the idea that they were providing help
Mhm.
for communities.
Right. But even, because even then in Jamaica, we still never had school counselors either.
No, when I went to Excelsior, there were no such thing as a counselor.
Okay, so yes, the question was
Yes,
relative to mentors because
right.
just about everyone will recognize at a certain point that there's somebody who motivated them
Mhm.
to go into a particular field of study or occupation. So, what was your motivation and who motivated you?
Well, yes, and as I mentioned earlier, my music teacher was the one who really told me that I needed to get a profession. And so after I graduated, I asked around what is the nearest profession to social work? Because, I mean, what's the nearest profession to sociology?
Mhm,
And because I really wanted to work with people, in just that, people.
mhm.
And I was told social work. And so I said, well, that's what I'll be. But
Okay.
before that, I remember why I wanted to be a civil servant when I was in Jamaica. When my father was a civil servant, my father was a station master with the Jamaican Government Railway.
Mhm,
And I just loved the way he loved his job. And he always looked so amazing. He was handsome, tall, and he wore white shirts and They had a uniform in those days.
Yes.
The civil servants in those days were very different. They
Black
were
pants and white
proud.
shirt.
Yes, yes. And they were proud of how they looked, you know. So everybody looked the same way
Yes.
because this was it was important. Your job
Yes.
was important, right?
Yes.
And I used to help him to sell tickets. My father was transferred different places, but he was in Kendall for the longest time. And he was there when they had that Kendall railway disaster.
Mm-hmm. I remember
And when the
history.
train collided and hundreds of people died.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so he was, and it happened near his railway. But anyway, so I used to help him to sell tickets, to get his books in order. I did everything, and I loved it. And so I had determined that I wanted to be a civil servant
Uh-huh.
because you got a house, he got a house near the station.
Mm-hmm.
And when you retired, you had a pension.
Uh-huh.
So, you picked up these things as you grew up, and so those are my early years. And then when I came here and then I needed to get a profession, I chose social work. And
Okay.
that was because I really wanted to work with people. But at the same time, I had professors who really paid attention to me and really encouraged me.
Uh-huh.
And as a matter of fact, my advisor, she recommended me for the Sociological Honor Society. I didn't
Uh-huh.
even know anything about that. But
Okay.
so I got a lot of help, along the way. And I tell students today, when you go to college, do not stand by with yourself. Talk to your professor, let them get to know you. And if
Yes.
they get tired of you, keep bothering them till they will
Yes.
pay attention to you because they know so much and they can be helpful and they want to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So use them, use them because it will make them feel good
Yes.
also, you know.
Yes.
And so that was important. And then when I came here and I worked for, oh, the other thing that was interesting, because I was a foreign student,
Mhm.
I wasn't eligible for scholarships at
Okay.
NYU for the graduate programs. Now, it was a time of Professor President Johnson. So it was a great society. There's a lot of monies flowing all around to help people go back to school. It was an exciting time in the 60s. And, but I was a foreign student, so I couldn't get it. But my professor recommended me to meet with a nonprofit, a social work agency in Hartford.
Uh-huh.
They were giving scholarships, they needed students. And so I met with the executive director, and on a handshake, I got a 2-year scholarship, full scholarship,
Mhm.
living expenses, with the promise that I would work with them for 2 years when I graduated.
Okay.
And that was on a handshake, nothing else.
Yes.
And when I graduated, I moved to Hartford and I worked with them for 2 years and came back to New York.
Mhm.
So, but again, my experience there, the people were wonderful.
Mhm.
I cannot complain. The people that I have worked with have been so generous in terms of spirit, in terms of welcoming me, in terms of giving me information if I needed it. And so, I've had a very positive experience here. And when I came back to New York,
Mhm.
I met one of my former students, and he told me about a job opening at Northside Center for Child Development, which
Uh-huh.
is another social agency founded by Kenneth Clark and his
Okay.
wife, Mamie Phipps Clark.
Uh-huh.
So I worked there for 2 years. And then I decided I wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to do something that had a bigger impact because
Mhm.
in the agencies, you work with individuals or with small groups.
Mhm.
it takes a long time for people to change. When they have problems, it takes a long time. So anyway, so I got a job at Hunter College, and I worked there maybe 2 or 3 years in their educational clinic as a social worker. And then LaGuardia Community College opened up. And one of my colleagues at the Hunter College Clinic, she was a psychologist. She got a job at LaGuardia. It had not been named as yet. It was still Community College number 9. And she called me. Now, we hadn't worked together, but we knew each other and we worked in the same program. And she called me. She said, Fern, I want you to come and work with me, and I want you to develop a course to teach a course for teachers and for paraprofessionals in education.
Okay.
And so I went to LaGuardia, was hired, and that began my whole life in higher ed. That began really my 44 years in higher education.
Okay. So now we know where you're coming from. So having done all of that and coming to the point when you decide that you're going to retire and do things of a different nature, you actually decide to write or record some of the, I would say, treasures that you have locked away in your mind. How did you really assess that and make that decision? And what motivated you to actually write, or I would say, make transparent?
Yeah.
That part that you actually now put and recorded.
Well, Trevor, I have had such amazing experiences here. And I have developed, what I do is develop programs to meet needs. And while I was at LaGuardia, my dean at the time said to me, Fern, what do you know about deafness? I said, nothing. What do you know? She said, nothing. But she said to me, let's go find out. And together, before I knew it, she had booked our seats to visit Washington, to visit Gallaudet College in Washington, which is the only liberal arts college in the world for deaf and hard of hearing people. We went down to Gallaudet. We spent a day with the dean of continuing ed, who was also deaf, but so he had different interpreters. And that was the first exposure we both had with, we didn't know who to look at. So we kept shifting, like from the interpreter to the person we are talking to, which is not what you do. You look at the person you're talking to always, not at the interpreter.
Right.
We didn't know that. And we just knew we were exhausted by the end of the day. But we learned a lot. And what we learned also, which my dean already knew, there were very few, probably no services for the adult deaf population in New York City.
Wow.
Lexington School for the Deaf, that's for students. There was a public school for deaf students on 23rd Street, but there was nothing for adults who wanted to provide, to get more education. So we started a program for deaf adults at LaGuardia.
Okay.
And where we provided everything, interpreters, we provided counseling, we provided job placement. We did it was comprehensive.
This is a pilot program.
It began as a pilot program. 50 years later, it is still at LaGuardia Community College. It's called a program for deaf adults. And by the time I left LaGuardia, we had over 500 deaf adults in programs there. And LaGuardia also now has an interpreter training program for people who would like to become interpreters for the deaf.
Right.
Yeah. So
because it's interesting that you point that out, because now just about every public forum or platform,
As an interpreter.
as an interpreter, even I think even at the United Nations.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They always had interpreters, the UN,
Okay.
but in New York it was not.
No, they always have interpreters, but they have deaf interpreters.
Mhm.
Okay. So now you were instrumental in making that now what we say with a commonplace in as it is, because you now created a professional platform for the deaf.
Yeah. Mhm. But you know, it was exciting because I was learning too. So everything I do, I am learning. You know, I may be providing access and opportunities for the population that I'm working to develop a program for, but I am always learning something,
Mm.
you know, and I learn from the populations that I work with. So we are on equal grounds.
So in documenting or in writing this book or document, what is the main purpose
Mhm.
of that you hope it will achieve, not only for the present but for the future?
Yeah, okay. Well, when I started to write it, I thought I wanted to write about my experiences both as a child growing up in Jamaica. The
Mhm.
first 7 chapters are all about Jamaica. And I wanted to document all those observations that I'd had in Jamaica and my own experiences, the language, the, the music, from the, you know, development of ska coming from Mento,
Mhm.
and you know, just that whole history, and also to to provide a sort of general taste. It's like getting a taste of
Mm.
food, good food, right?
More board.
Yeah, yes, definitely. That's what I wanted to do. But I wanted people to, especially Jamaicans, to read it and to remember
Mhm.
what it was like growing up there, especially during my period.
Yes.
Um, you know, things have changed so drastically that it's a whole different period. So, for example, I'll say to my friend Rose, we went to school together. So, what did your teacher say or do with something? She said, I don't remember any of that. I
Mhm.
don't remember my teacher. I don't. So I would say, how could you not remember? I remembered all my teachers at Excelsior. And
Uh-huh.
even in elementary school, I could name my teachers. So that memory was always there with me. And
Mhm.
then I said, I've got to document this. And then after it was published, oh, and then I had so many experiences here,
Mhm.
really unique experiences that it had to take a book to write about them. You
Uh,
know, and my memoir, it's really a series of vignette stories
yes.
that that shows you the power of relationships,
Uh-huh.
um, positive thinking, coincidental meetings. I mean, it just is everything. But after I wrote, and now I read it a lot myself, I'll say, I think I wrote this for myself. I think I wrote it so I would not forget.
Well, it's like going into the kitchen to cook. Yeah. when you taste the pot,
Yes,
tasting it for yourself.
yes, of course. It has to taste good. Yes.
But I would have to say that this should be a motivation for our community, for us, and for our culture, because there's hardly anything that you're going to say that you have represented that we across the board do not experience.
Hmm.
Okay. And that is, people will be able to relate to each section, each occasion, each
Mhm.
story, because your story represents them. Okay.
I hope
And
so.
and that is so important for our second generation that's born in this country.
Yes, very much so.
Because while you're documenting the history of their parents.
Mhm.
Because what you experience in Jamaica, their parents experienced.
Yes.
What you experienced when you came to this country,
Mhm.
their parents experienced. Okay. And in light of the fact that our children are not being introduced to Black history,
Yep.
somebody has to find a way to get them grounded.
Mhm.
You know, some of them are going to ask, who is Miss Lou and what's an answer story?
Yeah, definitely.
Because we do not really include that a lot in our culture at this time,
Mhm.
even as we take so much pleasure in reminding ourselves how much it influenced us as, you know, during our younger years.
Yeah.
So I have to say that this is not something that you might have to limit to a book. You have to start, you have to be on the speaker circuits.
Oh,
you know, I say this to quite a few of my, of people I have this type of conversation with.
yeah.
Dr. Claire Nelson, Dan McIntyre Pike, different people, because our culture sometimes does not recognize the diamonds that we have in our community. I this book, Acres of Diamonds, sometimes it's me so hard. Okay. And I've gotten into trouble with some of my friends
Hmm.
when I advise them publicly to our diaspora not to invite any politicians to speak at our events like our balls and our galas,
Mhm.
but to invite the people who heads up our institutions,
Yeah.
the people who are actually out there trying to make a change, not elected
Yeah.
to do something,
Mhm.
because they will show you exactly what the problem is, where they are, and what help they actually need. Okay.
Yeah.
And not using our professionals, um, or retirees who has all the experience
Mhm.
that can make us that can change our community is one of our weakness. It's one of our weakness. So I would have to say that I have to become your agent from now on.
Oh. Well, listen,
Because
I have so many amazing stories that it's when I think about them in reflection, I feel very blessed in many ways because I have had the opportunity to go places, when I worked at Bank Street, for example, I was able to take educators on what we call the long trips. And that was based on the founder of Bank Street. She used to take her students, they're all graduate students, and they were all at that time in the 30s, 1916 up to 1930 something. She would take them in a school bus. This was a white woman. All this at that time, all the teachers at the time were all middle class, upper middle class white
yes.
women, and she wanted to expose them to what reality was. So she would take them to Union Halls downtown. She
Uh-huh.
would take them to the fish market so
Uh,
they would begin to understand what workers did.
yes.
You have to know something about the workers in your community. And then she got a school bus, hired it, and took them to West Virginia so they could see what miners were going through. And
Yes.
they went down into the mines and they could experience it. So Bank Street is all about experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Even with children today, they'll take the children to a tailor shop so that they can see how a tailor makes clothes,
Yes.
to a dry cleaners, to they can see what goes into cleaning clothes. And these are children who pay, their parents pay a lot of money to
Yes.
send them to Bank Street School for Children.
Yes.
We have a elementary school and then we have the college.
Mm-hmm.
And so but um, the whole lesson behind the philosophy is experience. You learn through experience. And a friend of mine revived those long trips. They were canceled at one point years ago. And we revived them and began anyone could come. You pay your way, but it's all about education. And we
Uh-huh.
would go to places where school reform was happening
Mm-hmm.
or social reform was happening. We
Mm-hmm.
went to Tennessee, we went to Alabama, we went to West Virginia, we went back in those mines. So I know what it's like to be in a mine. We went to California. Oh, we went to so many places, always looking at what was happening in those places,
Mm-hmm.
social events, etc. Then we went to Finland, Iceland, we went to Scotland,
Uh-huh.
and we went to Europe too to see what was happening there.
Mm-hmm.
So there are so many, so many things,
Mm-hmm.
that I have experienced and want to expose other people to.
Mm-hmm.
And most of it is in my book.
Mm-hmm.
But just the memories of those experiences, Another one that I'll never forget is bringing together um, the Black students who integrated a school in Mississippi
Uh-huh.
with their white counterparts who were there in that school. This happened many years ago, but we went down there to bring them together because I was invited by a colleague who was at Barnard College. And
Mm-hmm.
she called me and said, Fern, will you come with me? This is what we have been invited to come and um, to bring those two groups together. This is a white professor at Barnard. So as I listened, I said, Mississippi? Oh, boy, I don't know if I want to go to Mississippi. But I always say yes. And so we went. It was the most amazing experience.
Uh-huh.
The first year, we met with 13 Black students who talked about what they went through going to that white school where they were not prepared at all. Parents didn't know how to prepare them because
Mm-hmm.
they had never integrated anything.
Mm-hmm.
The students were called names.
Mm-hmm.
It was awful. They talked about it. These were bright students, really brilliant. Then the second year, we invited the white students to come, and this was videotaped.
Mm-hmm.
And we met them separately. Um, and we told we didn't tell them what we heard from the Black students, who these are adults now, they're retired.
Mm-hmm.
So almost the same number, 13 in each group. They talked about how difficult it was for them because they had never experienced integration.
Right.
And so they had their own issues with it. Some of them felt badly at how the Black students were treated,
Mm-hmm.
but they couldn't do anything because they would have been ostracized.
Right.
So you saw a lot of humanity on both, well, especially on the white student side, which you hadn't, thought about. And then they said, what would you like us to do again? And they said, bring us together. So we went back the third year. So it was a 3-year program. We
Uh-huh.
went back the third year, and this was all videotaped and brought them together.
Oh.
And they were like long lost friends. They hugged each other. It was an amazing experience. And we brought them back to the high school where they met each other for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And then we met in a group and we were talking, and one white adult said, I was doing well in history, but Charmaine, who is Black, was doing far better than me, and we were competing side by side for history. So Charmaine then says, I didn't know you thought I was smart. And they never spoke to each other, ever.
Right, right.
Never. They never spoke to each other all these years. And so it was like, it was one of the most incredible experiences. And at the end, one of those young men he's now a lawyer, he's a white lawyer, and he said, I have to apologize for how we treated you because you didn't deserve it. And there was a feisty Black woman who I thought, uh-oh, this isn't going to sit well with her. She surprised me. She said, you know something? I didn't think I wanted any apology from you, but I accept it. And I appreciate your saying that. So it's on, Teachers College had the videotape made and it was available at Teachers College. But, that was another exciting, historical, and it had to do with you bring people together and what can come out of,
Yes.
sort of a reconciliation.
I like to use this analogy that when you throw a stone into a pond,
Yeah.
you don't know where the ripples stops.
Yeah.
Or do they ever stop?
Yes.
Because you already changed that generation. Therefore, the next generation is going to be a little bit better.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And
So,
yeah.
we could be talking for the next couple of hours, but
Oh, you can bet.
but I'm going to say at this stage, what's the name of your book? Where can it be found?
It's called Through Jamaican Lens.
Through Jamaican Lens. Yes, very clear.
Right.
I can see it very well.
And it can be found at the University Press of Mississippi.
Okay.
They were the publishers.
Uh-huh.
University Press of Mississippi. And it also, if you order it through Barnes and Nobles, it can be bought. Also Amazon.
Okay.
Can be bought on Amazon.
Well, I'm going to say this, Professor Khan, thank you so much for spending the first of many conversations on the SosoBone Media Network. And looking forward to us having established where we're coming from and where we are now. Next time you will be the futurist telling us where we are going or where we should be going. And I say thank you so much for spending the time updating our community. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure, Trevor. I wasn't sure what I would say, but you're a good interviewer and I appreciate that. And so I thank you. And I'll be happy to meet with you again anytime.
Thank you.